Something strange is happening. I think I'm trapped in a time loop. Something strange is happening. I think I'm trapped in a time loop. Something strange is happening. I think I'm trapped in a time loop. Something strange. Whoa! That was pretty strange. I'm glad I'm out of it now. It's the danger of time travel. You never know how it might affect things. But speaking of time travel, we need to do a little bit of time travel ourselves back into the past of yesterday. Yesterday, I took it a little bit easy on you with no fill in the blanks. But we are going to fill in a few blanks from yesterday's lesson and use them as a way of review to lead into today's lesson. So, everybody should have out your handouts, and we are going to start at the top of page 4. At the top of page 4, it starts out with a question. So let's make sure we're all there, good and ready to go. And the question states, for the next generation of Hebrews who did pass their testing in the wilderness, what was their reward? So reward is the first word to put into the blank. Reward, R-E-W-A-R-D. So that is our first question, followed up by the next. What happened next for them? So your first question with the first blank should read, for the next generation of Hebrews who did pass the testing in the wilderness, what was their reward? What happened next for them? Answer, they went to Disney World! No. No. The answer, they were able to enter the Promised Land by crossing the Jordan River. So your next blank is promised. Promised is P-R-O-M-I-S-E-D. So what happened to the Hebrews who passed their test into the wilderness? What was their reward? What happened next for them? They were able to enter the Promised Land by crossing the Jordan River. And the next question for your next blanks, the question is, and where is John doing his baptizing? Answer, the Jordan River. So your next two blanks are Jordan River, J-O-R-D-A-N, River, R-I-V-E-R. Isn't that interesting to the symbolism we've been talking about? So, that's our final question. What is this symbolizing? And our answer? For all the Hebrews who pass John's test in the wilderness, we've moved on from the Hebrews and their test in the wilderness. And once they pass it, they are able to cross the Jordan River into the Promised Land. Now, what's the case for the Hebrews who passed their test in the wilderness listening to John the Baptist? Our answer, for all the Hebrews who passed John's test in the wilderness, believing in the coming Messiah, who repent and get baptized in the Jordan River, are then able to enter into their land of promises. So our last blank is promises, P-R-O-M-I-S-E-S. And then if you remember yesterday, we made a third connection between the Hebrew slaves in the wilderness, between those who went out to hear John preaching in the wilderness, and we ended up with us. What happens when we're in our wilderness? And what happens if we pass the test in that wilderness of hard times? If we hold on to God, if we trust in Him, if we don't give up, if we keep following Jesus? Well, the answer is the same for those who were faithful in the past. God will bring us into the land of the promises that He has for us. That's a pretty cool scenario and some really cool symbolism going on in the book of Mark that goes back into the past, Mark's present, and our future. Sounds like some pretty interesting time travel to me. But anyway, let's move on and let's forward into further time today. And we are ready to move on to the next verse. It's going to seem like a trivial verse. Like, why is this in the Bible? There can't be anything deep or significant about this. But in fact, we're going to find it is hugely significant in a connection we're going to be able to make that demonstrates the power of John the Baptist's ministry and the coming ministry of the Messiah. So, if we look at Mark chapter 1, verse 6, right in the middle of your handout on page 4, it is written out for you. It says this about John the Baptist. Mark 1:6. John wore clothing made of camel's hair, with a leather belt around his waist, and he ate locusts and wild honey. Why would we need to know the fashion style of John the Baptist? Was there a New Testament dress code that he had to follow? No hoodies? No shorts above the knees? No, as we'll find out, there was a reason for why he wore what he wore, and even to a certain extent why he ate what he ate. But let's look at what he wore first. Again, it says that John's clothing was made of camel's hair with a leather belt around his waist. I think we all understand the concept of wearing a uniform. Wearing a uniform makes it easy for someone to identify who or what you are a part of. For example, if I was wearing this uniform, you would understand that I was a football player for the Green Bay Packers. Go, Pack, go. This is the uniform that everybody on that football team would wear. Second example, if I was wearing this uniform, what football team would I be representing by wearing this lovely, beautiful, best ever uniform in the world? I would be a football player for the University of Notre Dame. Da, 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 da. And you would be very blessed. Final example, what football team would I be representing if I wore this uniform on the field? Wah, wah, wah. Yes, you've guessed it. You would be representing the University of Michigan football team. Of course, that should go without saying, and you would not be very blessed. But anyway, somebody's got to do it. So that's the idea of a uniform. You see somebody wearing one of those jerseys, and it's easily identifiable what team they're on. Well, the same holds true for John the Baptist, wearing a clothing made of camel's hair with a leather belt around his waist. So to speak, that was a recognizable uniform of the day. For who? No, it wasn't for a football team, but it was for another kind of team that represented God. So let's fill in our first blank for today. Right underneath Mark chapter 1, verse 6, it says, "This was the type of clothing worn by prophets in the wilderness." So John the Baptist was wearing a uniform that made it recognizable to everybody who came out to see him in the wilderness that he was dressed as a prophet. Prophets that fit in the blank is spelled Prophets. And let's look at one scripture in Zechariah chapter 13, verse 4. It says this, "On that day, every prophet will be ashamed of his prophetic vision." So it's talking about false prophets, but the next line, by contrast, tells us something about true prophets who are accurately representing God when it says, "He will not put on a prophet's garment of hair in order to deceive." So a garment of hair or camel's hair was the true uniform, so to speak, of a true prophet of God in the wilderness. Next blank takes us one step further in what this uniform of a prophet that John the Baptist wore and its further meaning and symbolism. So for your next blank, it reads, "This kind of clothing also ties John the Baptist to the ministry of Elijah." Elijah is spelled Elijah. If you'll recall, we've talked about this a little bit before. What is so significant of tying John the Baptist as a prophet by what he wore to Elijah the prophet and what he wore? Well, let's look at 2 Kings chapter 1, verses 7 through 8. It reads this way, "The king asked them, 'What kind of man was it who came up to meet you and told you this?' And they replied, 'He was a man with a garment of hair and with a leather belt around his waist.' And the king said, 'That was Elijah, the Tishbite.'" So Elijah is described as wearing a garment of hair or camel's hair and was wearing a leather belt around his waist. Confirmation of the same language being used of John the Baptist and his attire. But now let's dive into the further, more significant meanings. So not only was John the Baptist wearing the uniform of a prophet in the wilderness, he is also tied specifically to another prophet in the wilderness named Elijah. Why? Turn to page 5 in your handout, and we have a blank to fill in. And that's this. In the last two verses, two verses, so 2 is your next blank, 2, TWO. In the last 2 verses of the Old Testament, God says that the next thing he will do is send Israel a prophet like Elijah. And guess who that was? John the Baptist. Malachi chapter 4, verses 5 and 6 says this, "See, I will send you the prophet Elijah before the great and dreadful day of the Lord comes. He will turn the hearts of the fathers to their children, and the hearts of the children to their fathers, or else I will come and strike the land with a curse." God promised at the end of the last book of the Old Testament to send another prophet like Elijah who is going to prepare the way for what God's next prophetic event was, which is the coming of the Messiah. Do you remember how long of a time period? Talk about time travel. How long of a time period was there between the end of the Old Testament in Malachi 4 and the beginning of the New Testament in the Gospels? Yes, that's right. Over 400 years. That is a lot of time for a pause, so to speak, in God's calendar of prophetic events. So think about it. For 400 years, what did God's people have to think about? That God's next move was to send a prophet to them like Elijah. That's what they were to look for to herald in the coming of the Messiah. So on the scene comes John the Baptist, and can you see how powerful verse 6 is, even though it seems like it's just a verse about what John was wearing? That his clothing of camel's hair and a leather belt around his waist was tying him precisely to demonstrate and prove and confirm that he was the answer to that 400-year-old question. He is the prophet like Elijah. He is the one preparing for the Messiah, and most importantly, it is now time for the Messiah to appear on the earth. That's huge, and yet it seems like such an insignificant verse. Moving on, it does in verse 6 give us another description of John the Baptist in the wilderness. Besides telling us what he wore, it also tells us what he ate. And it says this, that John's diet was locusts and honey. Locusts? For breakfast? Locusts? For lunch? Locusts? For dinner? Ew! Everybody knows that centipedes are far more appetizing than locusts. Slimy, but somehow satisfying. I had to trademark that expression. Anyway, why would they tell us that John the Baptist ate locusts and wild honey in the wilderness? Well, here's your first blank for this section. It says this: locusts were abundant in the desert and were considered to be kosher or clean food to eat. So your next blank is clean. C-L-E-A-N. So one reason why John the Baptist ate locusts was they were abundant in the desert. Big deal! If I go to the grocery store and I see an abundance of ghost peppers, because sometimes lately when we go into the grocery store, they're out of certain things that are on my grocery list. But what if I went to the grocery store and 3/4 of the aisles were filled with nothing but ghost peppers on sale? Would that mean I would stock up and fill my shopping cart full of ghost peppers to make that the main part of my diet? I guarantee you not. I was raised in the UP. Spicy to me is a little bit too much salt. Nevertheless, when you're in the wilderness or the desert, you do what you need to do to survive. It's not like there is a grocery store. You eat what's available to you. And for John the Baptist, locusts were the primary source of food that he could gather. Let's read Leviticus chapter 11, verses 20 through 23, when it does tell us that locusts indeed were something that he could eat in the desert according to the dietary laws of the Old Testament. Verse 20 starts out by saying, all flying insects that walk on all fours are to be detestable to you. That's talking about for your diet. Well, that sounds pretty good to me so far. There are, however, some winged creatures that walk on all fours that you may eat. Oh, wow, that's good news. They are those that have jointed legs for hopping on the ground. Wow, that sounds delicious. Pass me the menu. Of these you may eat any kind of locust, katydid, cricket, or grasshopper. But all other winged creatures that have 4 legs you are to detest. So that was the menu for John the Baptist. What do you want, John, for your entree? Locusts? Katydids? Crickets? Grasshoppers? Well, apparently what was abundant where John was in his desert was locusts. And just as an aside, locusts are a great source, of protein. So they would help sustain him in the wilderness. The other thing it says, which is a little bit more palatable, was that John the Baptist also had honey. That's not too bad for a dessert. In fact, one of the reasons why I was trapped in a time loop was I went all the way back to the time of John the Baptist and wandered in the desert for just a little while and collected some honey so I could bring it back to you. And I will share it with you when I return back to the school. So in my time travel, here's what I came back with. All the way from Israel, during the time of John the Baptist. 100% pure honey. And you know what was amazing in my time travel? Someone from Walmart traveled back in time as well and must have just beat me to the desert so that I could collect this and bring it back to you. And in fact, once you taste it, you'll want more for yourself. And I can get you as many bottles of this honey as you want through my time travels. That it will be yours for only $99.95 or 3 easy payments of $55.49. And you can eat the same honey that John the Baptist ate in the wilderness. You believe that? I've got some other stories to tell you. Anyway, that is our lesson for today. And in this, remember that some of the passages in the Bible that may not seem as important actually can be some of the most powerful. As we've seen today, this description, just one verse in verse 6 about what John wore and ate, shows that he is indeed a true prophet of God, sent in the likeness of Elijah to bring about the ministry of the Messiah and be that long-awaited answer to 400 years of waiting for that to happen. Well, you don't have to wait 400 years until we see each other next week. But until then, I love you and I'm praying for you and I'm looking forward to being back with you in the classroom. So Mr. Soche is signing off for today.